Okay, so what I'm going to do today in the remaining 20 minutes is something which I believe all of you have done before in MATLAB, and so it's nothing is going to be new. Or maybe it was not taught this way, I don't know. But we'll do this, and hopefully this will help you to get started with the homework I posted. Okay, so when you open Octave, you see a screen like this. What you have on the over here is the command history. Okay, so that's all the commands you type. So for example, if it was CLC, you should see it there. The workspace, all variables you create. So if you say a equals 1, then you see that a equals 1. It sort of remembers that in memory. And this is basically telling you which path you're in on your computer. This is important because when you save something, it'll be saved on that path by default. And then there is this editor thing, which I'll get in just a bit. Okay, now there are two ways to use Octave. One, the first one is you use it as a calculator where you can do calculations at the prompt, and the other one is using the editor. So when you try to use it as a calculator, right, you don't have to really write scripts. You just pretty much write everything on the command prompt. So I defined A, I defined B, and then if I want A plus B, that just tells me it's 3. So that's just using it as like a calculator. This is good, but not very useful because you cannot save anything. Now there is ways to save, right? You could I forget the command in MATLAB, but there's a way to save the command history and play it again. But there's limited utility of something like this because you cannot change the inputs, right? And you want to be able to change the inputs as and when you want. So the other way of using Octave is to use the editor, which I've opened. You can see this documentation, variable editor, open the editor. And whatever you type here can be saved and can be run any number of times. So let's just start playing with this. Okay, so I always like to put CLC, clear all. So CLC clears the screen. Anytime you have a doubt how a command runs, you can always use the command window. So I put CLC and it basically cleared the screen. If you want to test this out, it basically will clear this workspace. So if you do clear all, see it clears the workspace. So it's a good way to test code before you put it in the script. Okay, so before I get into the editor, there's one thing which is like fundamental about MATLAB and Octave. When you write anything down, let's say I wrote a equals 1. By the way, if you write a equals 1, it prints a equals 1, but you write b equals 2 and you put a semicolon, it doesn't print. So that semicolon suppresses output. So if you want to print it, then you need to remove the semicolon, or you just press B and say enter, and it'll print. Now, one thing I want you to know is, and this is like fundamental to MATLAB, is that anything you define in MATLAB or Octave is a matrix. So if you do size A, you see it's 1 cross 1. It has 1 row, 1 column. If you write, see, okay, this is how you write a vector. Okay, so you say size. It says a 1 row, 3 columns. Okay, if you want to write a row vector, so sorry, this is the row vector, column vector, you can write it this way. So you can say size of E, and that's clearly 3 cross 1. So it's a column vector. It is 1 column, 3 rows. But the other way to do it is if you have it was D, right? You could do D transpose, and that's simply you get the column vector, right? So remember that the fundamental unit in Octave and MATLAB is a matrix. Okay, now that we have that, let's go to the editor. Okay. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll see that one of the things we'll be doing constantly in this course is plotting. Let's learn how to do plotting. Let's just say we want to plot something as simple as the sine function. So let's say we want to plot sine from x equals, so plot sine of x where x goes from 0 to 2 pi. So we want some equidistant points. So we do linspace 0 times pi, and that actually creates x as a vector of 100 equidistant points from 0 to pi. The 100 is default, so you could change that by defining the third argument. That's 100. So anytime you need, if you are not sure of something, you can type help command function name. So in this case, okay, so this is, the help is not as good as MATLAB. MATLAB is very good about this. I like the documentation of MATLAB. I don't think it is. Yeah, I think so. In this case, you just go and just ask it linspace. Yeah, so then there's an Octave with extensive help. Help on each function. So it gives you various limits. Now you could also do this. The commands actually, many of the MATLAB commands are mirrored in Octave. So you could actually go and say linspace MATLAB. What I liked about MATLAB is it's phenomenal in terms of the documentation, and also gives you examples, which I really like. So you could actually copy paste this, right? So in that way, you should understand it's MATLAB is a paid software. So clearly it'll have better documentation, and then Octave is free and it's developed and maintained by people on their spare time. They're not paid for it, and so it's trusty. But that's fine as long as you can go to MATLAB and borrow their examples and use them in Octave. Okay. Okay, so we got linspace, so we generated the points. Now just do sine of x. Okay, and then the plot function is x comma y. Okay, it's asked me to save. Let me just save it on the desktop. Let me call that test1.m. And then this is the run. I always say change directory. And then here's the plot. Right? By default, it shows with a blue line. I think line width is 1, but you could change that easily. If you want a red with x's. So that's red with x's. Again, your best bet is to go and let's see if their help is any good. Help plot. Yeah, it doesn't have, let's see. Yeah, it doesn't have inbuilt help as MATLAB does. So in MATLAB, if you type help plot, it actually gives. So I really like the help in help plot one, because there's one example which if you use, then you can actually get just about everything about how to use the plot function. So plot MATLAB. So it gives you could just copy paste this to begin with. And a lot of my, I would say, code development when I do with complicated functions, to just take the example code, paste it in MATLAB, figure out how it works, and then modify it to suit my own purpose. So here it gives you various things, but you could obviously copy paste these and go from there. Okay. So that's one important thing we'll be doing is plotting. The other important thing we'll be doing is functions, right? So the functions are important because you'll see that we'll be using functions quite a lot. We'll have functions for interpolation, functions for ODE, functions for PDEs, and so on. So what we'll do is we'll add a simple function. The goal of the function is to take the elements of a vector and sum the elements of the vector. Okay. Now there's a Octave function for that, but we'll write our own function just so that we get the idea of, or revise how to write functions. So what we want is, if you, okay, the other thing is comments in Octave. You could use the percentage sign and write a comment, or you could use this too, the hash, to write a comment. The problem is that if you use hash, then you cannot run it in MATLAB, because MATLAB only understands the percentage. So don't try to avoid using hash, just use the comment. So this code will sum the elements of a vector. So what we'll do is, if you give me an example like this, 1, 1, 2, 3, it will give you sum would be of A would be how much? Is it 7? No, 5, 6. No, 7, right? It should give me sum of 7. So let's work on it. So always CLC, clear all. And let's say I define A as 1, 1, 2, 3. And then I want to say sum is, let me call that function myAdd. I need to pass A. So when I get this, when I call this function myAdd, which I've not defined yet, I should get sum and should print 7. Okay, so let's save this. Let's call it test2.m. Now, for the function myAdd, what I'll do is I'll create a new file. This one should have the name myAdd. It should have some input. It doesn't have to be A, right? Let's say vector. Okay, the reason I'm writing it this way is just to show you that it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's a dummy. It can be anything. And then my sum. Function my sum. Okay. Okay, so what we want to do here is take the vector and then sum it up. Now, there are many ways to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a dummy counter, initialize my sum to 0, and then keep adding the elements one by one. So what I'll do is I'll get length vector. Okay, so one more thing is, when you save this, you have to save this as myAdd, because that's what the function is called. Okay, so if you save it anything else, this code will not run. So it actually is giving me that suggestion to call it myAdd. Okay, so the way I like to do this is, if you're new to MATLAB, like I was many years back, I would really suggest people to start using the command window. So you write it here, right? And then I wrote something here. So to understand that, what I would do is I would just see what this would be. Length A, right? Vectors here is A. So you see, it gives me the length of A, it's giving the elements. So n is going to store the elements. So what I'm going to do here is, so this is just a way for me to understand a command without actually typing it there. It just helps me to debug. So then I do a for loop. Sorry, first I'll create my sum, make it, assign it to 0. Then I'll go from I equals 1 to n. My sum equals my sum plus vector I. So it takes the first element, 1, and adds it to my sum, which is 0. So it'll be 1 plus 0 is 1. Then goes to the next one. It picks up 1, adds that 1 to the previous sum, which is 1. So it gives me 2. And then does it again for 2 plus 2, 4. And then 3 plus 4 is 7. So that's how it's supposed to work. And so for the end, and I think I'm good. So save this. So my sum is, remember, my sum is the output. It has to be returned. It has to be defined as well, given error, because that has been something which it needs to send back. So let's go here. So it run this and gave me sum equals 7, right? Obviously, if you change A to something else, 5, 4, 3, okay, different size, I also can actually change it to be, so this was a row vector, a row matrix. This is now a column matrix, 5, 4, 3 with a transpose, right? I believe it will still work. So if you go here and say sum equals my, so the sum should be what? 9 plus 3 is 12. So 7 and 12. So it all works fine. Okay, so clearly that was, I wrote a myAdd, but what I recommend people is, before you try to reinvent the wheel, always check if there's a function. And in fact, there is a function. So here, the Octave help is not that great. But if you search here and say MATLAB, you know what? Let's skip this. Let's just go to ChatGPT. Okay, so is there function that can okay, the sum will do it. So it gives you a help. So there's an example. You could just copy paste this. So this is more than fine. If you want to do it this way, that's fine too.